Welcome to Everything You Need to Know About the Ascension of Humanity, the podcast where ancient wisdom meets modern science and spiritual evolution gets real. I'm Heather, an energy healer, channel, and spiritual coach with Divine Ascension Company. Each week, we're diving deep into the mysteries of human consciousness, spiritual awakening, and the profound transformation happening within us and around us. But here's the thing. We're not doing this with our heads in the clouds. We're bringing neuroscience, psychology, quantum physics, and cutting-edge research to the table alongside meditation, energy work, and timeless spiritual teachings. Because the truth is, the ascension of humanity isn't some far-off cosmic event. It's happening right now in the choices we make, the awareness we cultivate, and the healing we do within ourselves. Whether you're curious about how mindfulness literally rewires your brain, why shadow work is backed by depth psychology, or what coherence between your heart and mind actually means scientifically, you're in the right place. We'll explore practices like breathwork, meditation, and emotional alchemy, not as abstract concepts, but as tangible tools grounded in both spiritual wisdom and scientific understanding. And here's where it gets even better. In our bonus episodes, you'll hear from real people sharing real stories. These are the warriors, the healers, the everyday seekers who've walked through their own darkness and found their light. They'll share their breakthroughs, their struggles, and the resources that actually helped them along the way. Because personal growth isn't a solo journey, and you deserve to know you're not alone. So whether you're just beginning to question the nature of reality, or you're deep in your spiritual practice, this podcast is your companion on the path. It's time to expand, to awaken, and to rise together. Let's begin. Today's episode is a little different from our usual conversations, and I think that's exactly why you need to hear it. Joe is the founder of Second Chance Comedy, a touring stand-up comedy show built around addiction, recovery, and mental health. Not a speaker series, not a 12-step meeting, an actual comedy show with the explicit goal of chipping away at the stigma around some of life's darkest topics by finding the humor in them together. He has been in recovery for 25 years. His path there ran through a third DWI, a failed urine test, a weekend in jail, and a walk home in the pouring rain screaming at God to take him off the planet. Something shifted that weekend, and 2.5 decades later, he's produced over 60 shows across Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, and South Dakota, with 20% of profits going to Sobriety House, an organization serving people who can't afford recovery on their own. In this episode, Joe and I talk about the spiritual journey that started in recovery, why he believes Christianity was a stepping stone rather than a destination, what it felt like to stand on stage for the first time absolutely terrified, and why he committed to doing it 100 times before he'd allow himself to quit. We talk about why the best comedy requires emotional distance, what the woman at the Colorado Springs show said that made him realize exactly why this work matters, and why he believes some of the most beautiful souls who've ever come to this earth are the ones who went down the darkest roads. This one is going to make you think, and it might even make you laugh. Let's get into it. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. Today we have a very special guest. His name is Joe. He is the founder and creator of Second Chance Comedy. This is slightly different than what we normally do on this show, but I really wanted to talk to him because he produces stand-up comedy shows that are themed around things that are very close to my heart, including addiction and mental health, and helping to kind of chip away at the stigma that surrounds these topics. So I'm really excited to have you on here and to share your story. How are you doing today, Joe?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you, Heather?
I'm doing amazing. So why don't you kind of get started and tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so I can share just a brief overview of my journey. So I actually in my 50s, and I've gone through a lot of challenging parts of my life, I guess, to put it mildly. And several years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, I went through a really challenging time that kind of changed how I perceived life and kind of sent me down this I guess, spiritual journey where I started to really dig in and try to understand myself and my purpose and things like that. And along this journey, I discovered stand-up comedy, and what started out to be just this kind of bucket list item where I thought I would take this class and just try it out just to see how it goes, ended up just evolving quickly into what I'm doing today with comedy. And so what happened after that class is I started going to open mics, and I found it extremely therapeutic to, public speaking is something I was always deathly afraid of. And I found it just really empowering to stand on stage in front of a bunch of people, hoping they laugh, knowing they won't, and struggling through that. And I remembered the more I did this, the more I found myself leaving these open mic situations, kind of chuckling to myself, because it just felt so empowering, I guess, to let go of worry about what people think of me. And then through that journey, I started talking about 25 years ago is when I quit doing drugs. Prior to that, I had a very major drug addiction. And I started doing jokes about my past drug addiction. And as I was getting booked on shows and doing more mics, more and more people started coming up to me afterwards and telling me their story with addiction and recovery, and sharing a little bit about their journey with that. And after that happened so many times, I kind of had this light bulb moment where I thought to myself, well, maybe there's something we can do here. If I can stand on stage and share a story that maybe somebody in the audience has a relatable experience that they hold shame around. And if I can find a way for us to laugh about that together, that maybe it could relieve some of that shame that people hold on to. And that was kind of the idea that sparked this whole second chance comedy. And so I talked to a couple other comedians that I knew that were in recovery, and they were excited about it. And that's what kind of launched this second chance comedy. And yeah, we've done, I think, 62 shows since we started in 2024, and we've got a lot more booked already. But yeah, it just kind of became this idea that if we can talk about these tough things, but shine light on the dark topics would be a good way to put it,
Mhm.
then maybe we can collectively let go of some of the shame and regret and sadness around some of these things, and find ways to laugh at the tougher areas of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's amazing because, I've been through my own period of addiction and recovery, and it's and even if it's not addiction and recovery, if it's any of those, really dark topics that people don't like to talk about or to let even other people in about that part of their life. And if anyone knows me that's listening, like I use humor to lighten the mood all the time because sometimes, especially as a spiritual coach and a healer, you talk about some heavy stuff. So it's nice to lighten the mood and to tell these stories that so many people can find relatable that they're just afraid to talk to. Or talk about. So providing that safe space to allow people to like you said, lighten the mood and lighten the load a little bit is truly amazing.
Yeah, there's a quote that really stood out to me a few years ago, and I don't know why, I can never remember who said this, but the quote is, if we all got together in a circle and confessed our sins with each other, we would laugh at the lack of originality. And and that's really powerful, because if you think about it, a lot of these things that we hold on to shame, these thoughts that we keep inside ourselves that we're afraid to share with other people, it's like, in reality, a lot of people are thinking the same things.
Mhm.
But if we could just have that courage to be like, share that with somebody else, we might realize that we have more in common with each other than we might think at times. And I think that connection that we can build around these common areas, I think, can be really powerful, and dealing with things like loneliness and like I said, shame, and just a lot of those things that we just let beat us up inside. So
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's truly amazing. And I love that quote. That's awesome. So when you mentioned your spiritual journey, and I'm curious, like and you don't have to share this if you don't want to, but when you were in the throes of addiction and you decided, okay, this is it for me, like I can't do this anymore, it's time to change. Like what was the catalyst for that? What was that experience like?
Yeah, that's really an interesting story. And I was about 30 years old, and I had just I'd gotten my third DWI, and I was had to go through this mandated drug rehabilitation program. And then after that, I had to do this probation program through the county. And when I went for the orientation for the probation program, I wasn't aware that they were going to give me a urine analysis in that meeting. And I wasn't prepared for that because I was still very active in my addiction. So I failed that urine analysis. And then my probation officer called me up the next day and she's like, yeah, we have a problem. And of course, my reaction, like any other good addict, is denial. I was like, that can't be. There's something wrong with the test. You're wrong. And and I laid all that on her. And I always picture her like sitting with her feet up on the desk, kind of maybe like playing with something in her hand, just letting me vent before she's like, Joe, like the test. You tested positive, and this is the consequence. But anyway, I had to go to jail for a weekend as a consequence of that. And I don't know, something happened the leading up to going into jail. I, of course, wanted to get high before going to jail the next day, and I couldn't find any drugs. And I realized that I had become this joke of a person to all of the people that knew me. And I was going home that night. I had about a half-hour walk from the bus stop to where I was living, and it was pouring rain, and it's the middle of the night. And I was the crazy person in the street just screaming at God to take me off this planet. I was just done. I didn't want to be here anymore, didn't want to be alive anymore. And I don't know what happened. I went home that night, I went to bed, and the next day I got up and I checked myself into the jail. And something clicked in my brain that weekend. And after getting out of jail, I just never touched drugs again. And I always attributed that to some sort of divine intervention. And as somebody that was raised Catholic and would have considered myself a Christian, that's the God that I knew. And I did since then, I did get very deep into Christianity as part of my journey, which I would no longer consider myself a Christian today. I don't know if you want to get into that, but that's another part of that. But I do think Christianity was a big part of my spiritual journey. But I feel like Christianity was a stepping stone to where I am today in my spiritual journey.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, I was raised in a Christian home. My grandmother was an ordained deacon, and when I was little, I had to go to church every weekend. So that exposure as a young child was definitely a stepping stone in my journey as well. And I don't consider myself Christian anymore either, but it kind of opens the doorway to open your mind to other things as you continue on. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I think it's really hard for me to imagine that there's not something bigger than ourselves out here, but the religious dogma that got got put in place, to try to explain that, that just doesn't align with me anymore.
Yeah, yeah. I relate to that for sure. So you said that getting up on stage and doing this comedy, you were definitely afraid of speaking in front of people, which I totally really I've had to work through blocks for that as well. This podcast has helped me a lot. But getting up on stage for that first time, what was that like? How did that feel?
It's, my first time on stage was at an open mic, and I was reading my set off of my phone, and I would say I was probably very, very hunched over, kind of head down, not making eye contact, just reading off my phone, kind of in this little curled up position on stage. It was terrifying, and I didn't really get any laughs, and I don't know, I just realized that, I mean, in that moment, I was like, this isn't for me. That's how I felt. But but yeah, that was my first experience. And then the second experience was after taking the class that I took, there's a showcase at the end of the class where all the students get to do like a 6 or 7 minute set. And that I was also terrified, but I had practiced so much that I was a little bit more prepared. And when I started getting some laughs, that's when I started to ease up. Even today, after being on stage hundreds of times, I still like once I get that first laugh, it's like, okay, I can do this now, but until that first laugh, it's very terrifying still, even today.
Yeah, I was going to ask, with that first experience under your belt, how did you, in your mind, reconcile the fact that even though you didn't get any laughs, that it was terrifying? What gave you the courage to get up there and do it again?
Well, that was my first chance getting on stage in front of people before the showcase from the class that I was taking. And I had committed to taking that class and seeing that through. So that was all kind of set in place. So I didn't really, in my mind, I didn't have a choice. I had to do it. I'd already committed to doing it. But 3 days later, I went back to that same club and ran the same material at an open mic and got absolutely nothing off it. And it was pretty devastating
Yeah.
to just realize, okay, I can't just do this. The showcase is like, that's friends and family. People are there to be supportive. They're there to laugh. So it's kind of shooting fish in a barrel, so to speak.
Hmm.
But like to go up in front of just a raw audience that you don't have any relation to, that's a whole different thing. And figuring out how to get laughs in that type of an environment is much more difficult. But yeah, I don't know, like something happened in my brain where I made a commitment. I know from past experiences that whenever I would indulge in a new hobby or a new activity, I would give up really quickly. And I just committed to doing 100 times on stage before I was going to quit this. It was kind of like a personal challenge that I made for myself. And so I just started going to as many open mics as I could because I wanted to get through this 100 times on the stage before as quick as possible. And just over time, I noticed that I was starting to get better. I was starting to get laughs. I was starting to figure things out. And it just, the more that happened, the more I started to have good experiences than bad experiences. And I think that's just what kept me going.
Yeah. And do you think it was the topic that you were, talking about, or, getting more loose and at ease, or like what was the shift that started people being more receptive to your stand up?
Well, I think a lot of it comes to, I mean, like stand up works because it's something people can relate to and they can understand and they can kind of see what you're trying to share. Coincidentally, kind of on topic here, my first set that I wrote through that class that I took was all about leaving the church. And so I had a 6, 7 minute set that I did talking about what it was like to leave this toxic Christian environment that I was in. So I think it's really the challenge with stand-up comedy is you have to find a way to catch their attention, get them interested in what you're saying, and then find a way to make it funny. And it takes practice, it takes reps, it takes, changing how you say things. And I think just over time, things evolve to the point. I think like even in the beginning, it's like, okay, people could find what I'm sharing interesting, but I couldn't figure out a way to make it tight enough to keep their attention long enough to get the laughs out of them. And that's what that practice kind of helped bring out.
Gotcha. So how did the class end up turning out?
The class was great. I think it's a great experience. I tell everybody, anybody that I know that wants to get into stand up, I always recommend that class because the teacher, she does a great job of really teaching you like why jokes work, joke structure, how to make it funny, how to punch things up. And it's really a good opportunity to just really craft a set and get your feet wet in the comedy world. But yeah, it was a great experience and I met some great people. In fact, one of the main people that are on most of my second chance comedy shows was somebody I took that first class with. So
Nice.
she became a regular on my shows as well. But
Oh,
that was great.
yeah. I took a theater class in college and I really enjoyed it. I was a psychology major, so this was like completely off topic for me, but it was something that I wanted to be an actress when I was a little kid. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to take this theater class. I'm going to try to get over my fear of being on stage in front of people. And she's like, it was so, like you said, it's so empowering to be able to like use the script and use this character to kind of give yourself a permission slip to allow these emotions to come out on stage where it's like, okay, I feel these emotions. I can connect with this character. This is really me, but I'm using this mask to kind of let these things out in a way that, doesn't require any judgment from anyone else because they're looking at the character where you're filling that role, right? So it is very empowering and it's very like, it was very releasing for me to kind of give myself that space to release these emotions in a way that just it was different than like unloading off on someone, you know what I mean? So it was a very interesting experience, and I really enjoyed it. And my teacher was even like, "Hey, are you sure you don't want to switch majors?" And I was like, "No, I can't. I can't do it." But it was tempting.
Yeah. No, there is something about it. And I think that's what, in my mind, what makes comedy great is when there's something authentic about it, like when it's somebody that's really sharing something that matters to them and gives you something to think about. One thing that I learned from taking that class was you have to have an emotional connection to what you're talking about, but you can't be too emotionally connected to it, right? Like it's got to be far enough in the past that you can let the audience know, because part of it is letting the audience know, hey, I'm going to talk about some difficult stuff, but I'm okay with it. So you can laugh with me. Because
Right.
if you're still too, like if you just recently went through a divorce or some other traumatizing experience, it would be tough to talk about that right away because the audience would be like, okay, he's not healed enough. I don't feel comfortable laughing at this right now.
Hmm.
And so I remember there was one joke that I had in my set that talked about this guy that I felt was a little inappropriate around my daughters. And the instructor, she said, I don't think you're ready to talk about that on stage yet. I think you're still a little upset about that. And so I dropped that joke from my set for exactly that reason, and I think it's really like there's got to be enough distance that I'm okay with it. Yeah, it was a messed up time, but I'm okay with it now and I can laugh about it. But it's still got to be close enough that I can connect with it emotionally so that the audience can feel the genuineness of what I'm saying, so it's
Right.
it's a tough balance.
Hmm. I mean, it's like that with anything, finding that balance. So tell
Right.
us more about your comedy show itself. Where is it? How often do you do it? What's it? Give us all the juicy details.
Yeah, so the show is called Second Chance Comedy. I actually originally started out focusing primarily on addiction and recovery, but I've kind of now I call it Second Chance Comedy Presents We're All Doing Great and Other Lies. And my idea was to branch out a little bit more into mental health because I think there's a direct correlation between mental health and addiction. They're all kind of tied to that same underlying wounds that we're dealing with. But yeah, so my website is secondchancecomedy.com. We do shows. Basically, what I do is I look for venues where I can either rent or maybe work in collaboration with the venue to produce the shows. And we've done them all over Colorado, up and down the mountain range here in Denver, Fort Collins, Colorado Springs, and anything in between. Last year, we did a couple of shows down in Pagosa Springs and Durango. We're going to do that again here coming up in September. And then we've also done a couple of shows in Wyoming and Nebraska, and we've got a couple coming up we're going to be going back to Nebraska and then South Dakota here coming up in August. So really trying to branch out a little bit more, but I've been doing them primarily. I'm renting venues, selling tickets. And what I want people to understand is this is a comedy show. It's not a 12-step speaker meeting. It's not a lecture. It's not, we're going to tell you some dark story that might have some laughs along the way. No, this is a stand-up comedy show. And the idea is to put on a stand-up comedy show that anybody can have fun at, but maybe we chip away at the stigma and shame around mental health and addiction in the process, like subtly without people even realizing it. But yeah, we rent venues all over Colorado. We're starting to branch out a little bit more. We've done a couple of prepaid shows. We've had, recovery centers and organizations pay us to come do a show for them. A couple of community colleges that we've done shows that. So really just trying to branch out wherever we can from there.
Awesome. Well, if you ever make it up to Washington State, let me know. I'd love to come see it.
I actually was just recently given a contact of a comedian that would be on brand that is up in Washington. And that's the challenge with going out of state is now I've got to, I mean, a lot of these shows, some are profitable, some we lose money at, it's always a challenge when you're selling tickets. But to go travel to do a show, now you've got a whole whole bunch more expenses to consider. So I've been slowly trying to look for comedians in different parts of the country that I feel would fit with the brand of the show. So that way we wouldn't have to take 5 comedians on the road. We could just maybe take 1 comedian on the road and then find some local comedians. But anyway, I actually just recently got a name of somebody up in Washington. So I've been kind of toying with the idea of maybe getting up there. So
Awesome. That's really cool. So when you're up on stage and you're doing your act, do you interact with the audience?
A little bit, I mean, most of it is, I have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to say before I start talking. But if there is opportunities to enter, it depends on like smaller rooms, it goes a lot further to kind of have some audience interaction. Larger rooms, like if you're in a theater and you've got, 150 people in the audience, then sometimes I'll just like stay mostly on script. But yeah, there are definitely times, or if somebody from the audience says something, there might be an opportunity to have a little bit of interaction. We have done a couple of shows for Ames Community College up in Greeley, Colorado, where we did a talkback session at the end of the show, where we allowed the audience members to ask questions. So that was kind of a cool experience, and I would love to do more of that. But it was a chance for them to, kind of pass around the microphone, and then people in the audience could ask us questions either collectively or individually. So I like a lot of that interaction. I love doing these podcasts, these opportunities to kind of talk more about the mindset behind it versus just getting on stage and doing the jokes.
The reason I ask, I love comedy, so I watch a lot of comedians, and I was curious if you had like a really interesting story about an audience interaction, or maybe something that someone came up and told you afterwards, but anything like that really caught you off guard or was surprising.
Yeah. So when I first started doing these, I haven't been doing them recently because it's a lot of work. But when I first started doing these, I would try to get audience members to maybe do a video testimonial from their experience at the show after the show. And I had a friend of mine that was helping out with those, and he would kind of interview people on camera. And so that, I'd go home and the next day I would get up and I would download the videos and I would watch them just to kind of see what the videos were like. I mean, the feedback in general was just really amazing. I mean, it was just so great to hear what people shared about their experience. But there was one show we did in Colorado Springs, and the next morning I was watching this video testimonial, and he asked her, he said, what makes this different than other comedy shows you've gone to? And she mentioned that she was in recovery herself, but the last thing that she said in that testimonial was she goes, I feel like I belong. And that was super powerful because that's really that's the goal, right? Like we want people to belong. We want people to feel included, not lonely, part of something, that connection. And so just to have this woman genuinely say, I feel like I belong here at one of our comedy shows was really powerful. So
Yeah, that's amazing. Because, and being in addiction and recovery, because you kind of burn the bridges with people throughout your life, and you are looked down upon once people find out because of that stigma, because they don't take the time to understand why. They're just like, oh, you're an addict, blah, blah, blah. But to have something outside of like a rehab center or a 12-step program where people can really feel included and feel like they belong, like that's truly an amazing gift.
yeah, and that's really the coolest thing, knowing that we've had that impact. I give 20% of our profits goes to an organization called Sobriety House, and they really cater to people that can't afford to get help anywhere else. And often they'll bring a group of people to our shows, and they've written letters to me thanking me for their experience with the shows. But just being in connection with that organization has really, given me a lot of visibility into how we're impacting things, and just more visibility into the recovery community in general. But yeah, it's I think it's a powerful thing. Like, I mean, loneliness is a horrible feeling, and I think it's probably a big reason why a lot of people get into substance use and addiction.
Hmm.
And I just, yeah, I think it's just it's sad that so many people look at drug addicts as just being losers who chose to make bad decisions, and it's not really what it is. There's something deeper there. And I honestly think, I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambling now, but
You're
there
good.
was one woman I know where she had one kid that was struggling with drugs, and then she found out that her other son also had issues with drugs, and she said 100% of my kids are drug addicts. And it was like she was devastated by this. And I told her, I said, look, I said, so many people come into this world and they've got the kindest souls and the kindest hearts, and they're creative people. And then they grow up and they realize that this world is not made for them. And they just look for a way to hide. And so I think it's some of the most beautiful people that ever came to this earth went down that dark road of substance use and addiction. And it's not a choice. Like nobody wakes up and says, hey, I'm just going to screw up my whole life and be a drug addict. I don't think anybody's ever made that decision. It's something that just happens, and it happens to some of the most wonderful humans that ever came to this earth.
100%. I agree with that. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, I think you're doing wonderful things, and I really would like to see your show if you do make it out here. If I ever get to Colorado, I'll definitely come check you out.
Yeah, for sure. I'll give you tickets. So you
Yeah.
won't even have to pay. So
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. It was wonderful to speak with you.
thank you for having me. And if anybody wants to learn more, like I said, secondchancecomedy.com. I try to keep it updated with all our upcoming shows. I'm actually working on a website refresh right now too. So, but yeah, if anybody's ever interested in checking out a show or wants to book us for an event or anything, secondchancecomedy.com is the website. And you can contact me through that website as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. It's a pleasure being here.
If something in today's episode hit a little too close to home, if you've done the work and something still won't move, I want you to look into astral surgery. It's precision energy work that goes where standard clearing can't reach. One session, full report, real results. Everything you need is at divineascensionco.com. You deserve to be free of what was never yours to carry.